Okay, in this video we're discussing the rise of gambling sponsorship and advertising in sports. Now, here in the UK, I think as a society in the UK at least, I think we've reached a point where we're starting to roll it back a little bit. We're pushing back a little bit. Reminds me a lot of the tobacco sponsorship debate in the 90s that led to the tobacco ban in sponsorship. The last sport to have tobacco sponsorship was F1. That was about in the mid 2000s. So we've had this debate here before about tobacco companies sponsoring sporting events. Now they don't. In France, alcohol sponsorship is banned. So we've been here before with other companies and other products that used to sponsor a lot of major sporting events no longer doing it. And in the UK, there's now this growing trend to bring in legislation to reduce the number of TV and internet ads during live sporting broadcasts and in general before a certain time. And now the Premier League, obviously, a few months ago announced that by 2026, Premier League sides will not be allowed to have a gambling company as the main title sponsor of their stadium or their team. Title, that's their main sponsor, not their secondary or tertiary sponsors, but their main on the jersey, on the football shirt, in the stands. Only the English Premier League. That doesn't cover the rest of the Football League, doesn't cover Scottish football. So it's not a UK-wide policy. But I think there's been proposals to bring in legislation to reduce, not completely outright ban, because I think that's draconian, but to regulate the sponsorship side of things more. And we've seen a lot of, gambling scandals in a lot of sports, snooker being one of them, and snooker is one of those sports that's now heavily dominated by the gambling sponsorship side of things. Heavily dominated. We've seen a couple of high-profile football players, including Ivan Toney, recently get bans for breaching betting rules. So it's a big thing. So we're at this stage in our sponsorship cycle. The US, Canada, and Australia and New Zealand are, 20 years behind. And what is interesting is this. Before the financial crash of 2007, 2010, that kind of period where the credit crunch, the financial downturn, the Great Recession, that kind of thing, gambling ads were limited on TV here. And then sports realised we need revenue. We've lost all this advertising revenue. Where sponsors are struggling, companies are going out of business or reducing their advertising spend. The gambling companies went, bosh, we'll step up. And it's become very insidious over the last 15 years here. The US has only recently fully legalised gambling for every single state. Now, not every single state in the US has enacted gambling legislation, but they are allowed to. So some locations in the US it's still illegal, unless it's a state lottery or a regional lottery, to have gambling ads and to go online sports betting and online gambling. Another reason why I think we're seeing this massive upsurge of gambling advertising and sponsorship is Las Vegas having the Raiders, the Golden Knights. They're planning to get the Oakland Athletics to relocate. They're planning to get an MLS team at some point. The fact that Las Vegas now has some of the major leagues placing teams there in recent years. Firstly with the Golden Knights with the NHL, then getting the Raiders to relocate from Oakland to Vegas. They're going to be hosting Super Bowl. Obviously brought in the gambling firms based in the US and that revenue. Then the Congress and the Senate in the US passed legislation legalizing across all 50 states and territories and the US territories. It's changed. And the gambling companies now are, instead of just being allowed to advertise in Atlantic City and Jersey and in the state of Nevada, they're allowed to, everywhere. They're just, and it's at a time when we've had the COVID pandemic as well, which is very important, where revenues were down, sports leagues were struggling, and suddenly now you have this liberalisation of the gambling laws, and the advertising companies, who will, put the ads obviously for a company. So you'll have these advertising companies will say, look, we'll charge X amount per ad, and then so these big gambling firms will go to these advertising agencies and go, look, we wish to have an ad for 30 seconds on YouTube, for example. How can we do it? Bosh. It's the same with Australia with the NRL and AFL. I'm a massive NRL fan, so for those newer viewers to the channel, so I've done a lot of NRL and AFL content. It is also insidious, and I've seen a rise of it, especially over the last 3-4 years. And I think the COVID pandemic again, revenue streams, and the gambling companies have made a lot of money. They're one of the few profitable industries consistently since, I would say, 2008. And they doubled down. And I've watched this Australian documentary on the gambling industry and its links with sport. And for every Australian dollar made through gambling on the NRL or the AFL, I think a percentage of that goes to the league. They've signed these interesting contracts. So when you're watching an NRL broadcast and the gambling ad comes up saying who do you think is going to win, who's going to be the first point scorer, what the final score is going to be, this player might get 3 tries, this player might score in the first 20 minutes. If everyone starts placing bets on that, the NRL, for example, gets 20% out of every dollar made profit. It's built into sports contracts. The NHL, the NBA, the NFL in the US, for every dollar spent on a gambling partner goes into their revenue streams. So this makes the leagues a lot of money, which they were losing in 2020, 2021. They're making back through contracts with the gambling firms. And I think it's going to be very, very hard to wean off these leagues and teams that have these commercial arrangements with gambling firms. Very, very hard. And we had this with the tobacco advertising. F1 was the die-hard, we're digging our heels in, we make so much money revenue-wise by having these sponsors paying money. So, the Rothmans Williams team, Marlboro with Ferrari, West Cigarettes with McLaren, BAR Honda, which had Lucky Strike advertised. It took until the mid-2000s for those contracts to lapse before they disappeared. But F1 was heavily reliant on tobacco sponsorship. Same with other forms of motorsport, heavily reliant. NASCAR was, MotoGP, World Superbikes, World Rally. They were heavily reliant on it. But for some reason, F1 were the diehards. They hung on till the very, very end. They got special dispensation when Bernie Ecclestone was running F1, where he was having discussions with some of the world leaders, and when we're talking about a global ban on tobacco advertising. And it was a very painful transition for F1. And now with F1, now again the betting ads. It makes me uncomfortable because we've seen so many match fixing and corruption scandals in sport, especially since the recession of 2008. It goes hand in hand, but here in the UK, at least, we are starting to see that a little bit of pushback. There is legislation coming in. There is a trend to try and break that relationship between the gambling firms and advertising and sponsoring of sport. It's not going to fully go away, but they need to roll it back a little bit, whereas the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, some other parts of the world are like 10, 15 years behind. And they're going to go through the same pains that I think the UK sporting landscape's gone through. But that's my view now. I'm not a fan of it. I never have been. It is worrying the amount of advertising, but at the same time, these leagues and teams and individuals in sport needed revenue, and the two major things that hurt them were the financial crash of 2008 and COVID. If those two things don't happen, I don't think we see the massive explosion in the gambling firms sponsoring and advertising in sport. And we don't see sports being as reliant on that revenue stream because fans would still have had more disposable income to spend going to games, buying merchandise, buying the TV package, for example. Other companies that would have normally been the traditional sponsors, apart from tobacco, obviously, would have also had that disposable income, operating income in their budget to go, right, this is our advertising budget, this is our sponsorship budget, this is where we're doing our brand PR. So I think we're going to see the debate at some point in the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand as well. These are other major, massive sports markets where the people are sports mad, and professional sport is worth billions and billions and billions of dollars. And I think in time we're going to have that debate 10, 15 years down the line, maybe sooner, maybe longer. But professional sport needs to look at its revenue streams and how they're structured and how they make money, because as I say, with tobacco sponsorship, big debate. In France, they banned alcohol sponsorship, and some sports leagues and teams were heavily impacted by that. So we'll see what happens. But for me, for now, that's my thoughts on it. What are your thoughts on gambling, sponsorship, and advertising in sport? And where do you think we see it going? Because this is a very interesting issue. So, yeah, that's it all from me for now. Thank you very much for watching. Place your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll have some more content for you very, very soon.